I'm back, and I'm later than ever. Hello, citizens of the multiverse, and welcome back to Dark Knight Nation. I know it's been a minute, and I'm really sorry. Life's kind of been punching me in the face. Between full-time job, college education, and a lot of stuff going on around the place in terms of my house, it's kind of taken priority over this. But we are here, we are back. The love of comics never ends. And today, I'm here to let you guys listen in on an amazing conversation I had with the one, the only writer, artist extraordinaire, Liam Sharp. Now, if you guys have never heard of this guy, I'd 100% recommend that you go look him up. In recent years, he's been one of the lead artists on Greg Rucka's Wonder Woman Rebirth run with Nicola Scott, and currently, at the time of this recording, he is finishing up on his Green Lantern run with the astounding Grant Morrison. As of today, issue 12 has come out, and if you haven't already, please make sure you guys go pick yours up. The first trade to this arc is already out, but as of the time of this recording, this is the end of their first season, so to speak, and I guess they're going to be doing it kind of Netflix style. It's been such a fun ride, such amazing art. Liam's visual prowess has just expanded, and he's shown his complete and utter range in the medium throughout this series in ways unlike I've ever seen from him before. And mind you, I've always been a huge fan of his art. So we go from that to even his written and drawn work in Batman and Wonder Woman, The Brave and the Bold. And we talk about a little bit about his life, his influences, his career, and honestly was just such a dumbfoundingly great opportunity that if you're watching this, Liam, I do want to truly thank you for your time and for your patience. And that was all done at Terrificon 2019. I want to urge you to please make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe down to the channel for more. That's the stuff that keeps me going, letting me know that you guys are enjoying what I'm putting out. If this video can hit 20 likes within the first 3 days, I'll be sending one lucky winner a free Green Lantern lithograph of the first cover. This thing is spectacular, eye-grabbing, and just puts on display immediately Liam Sharp's amazing artistic talent. So, how do you enter? Like this video, comment down below letting us know what you think of the interview, any questions you might have for Liam. Hopefully one day we'll be able to get him back on. And of course, make sure to check out the amazing sponsors of the video, AJ's Comics. You can check them out using the link in the description below to both their website and their Twitter. We're currently redoing their website and making it super cool and fun, but they're the place that I go to pick up my comics every single week. And there's always an opportunity for those of you who don't live near a local comic book shop, because you can subscribe to them online. Manage your pull list there through a website called Manage Comics, and if you subscribe to them, anything you buy from them is 10% off. One of the beautiful things is, as long as the order is over $100, the shipping is absolutely free. So you can have Pete and the gang hold your books for a little bit. Otherwise, if you are currently in the United States military, on a United States base, internationally, that still applies. So it's super cool, a great way to support a great shop and get your comics. These guys are always super on time with my books, always making sure they're in the best condition, and sometimes taking the liberty to add something if they think I might enjoy it, which I can always appreciate, because with my busy schedule, I really don't always know what's coming out, and so they really hold me down. But please make sure you guys enter to win that awesome lithograph. Without further ado, again, here it is, my conversation with the amazing Liam Sharp. First off, I did want to say thank you so much for your time, Liam. I know that you're very busy and this is a very rare opportunity, so thanks again.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
As in recent years, this is kind of the time where I've become a lot more introduced to your work. Namely, you know, I guess we can start with Wonder Woman with Greg. He's such an iconic writer. I know you hadn't done a lot of Big 2 work in a while up until that point. So what was kind of the catalyst for you getting together with Greg?
It was funny the way things work out. A friend of a friend who knows a lot of people in the industry, he had heard that Wonder Woman had been just turned down by a mutual friend of ours. And I didn't sort of think immediately, oh, I'd love to do Wonder Woman. But that night I came home and I had a Red Sonja piece I'd done, which is a really sort of fantasy-based piece, and it's got It's got like lots of leaves and a figure of death that's covered in vines, and she's in this kind of labyrinth, and she's looking at you, and she's got a little cut on her leg, and it's all kind of very symbolic, and it's like you're going to be the next victim type thing. And I looked at it and thought, you could do Wonder Woman like that in a real sort of fantasy way, and suddenly it sort of clicked in my mind. I went to bed that night, had this crazy dream about Wonder Woman. Pretty much, it was like the Azzarello story, actually. It was this big, crazy, epic fantasy dream, and I don't usually have dreams like that. And I woke up just like, oh my God, I should do Wonder Woman. It would be great. So I didn't obviously expect that was going to happen, but I sent Jim Lee that Red Sonja piece and said, hey Jim, you could do Wonder Woman like this. And he went, hell yeah, you could. Have you ever done any Wonder Woman? I said, no, but I'll do one straight away. Spent the next 2 days doing this test piece, which actually ended up in the book Love is Love. So it's that page. Yeah. And Jim loved it, so he went to bat for me in DC, and it just sort of progressed from there, and the next thing I know, I was doing the book.
I mean, it definitely seems to have paid off. At this point in the short time since Rebirth, you've had that run with Greg.
Right.
And then you got to write and illustrate your Batman and Wonder Woman Brave and the Bold. And now, Green Lantern with one of the most iconic comic book writers of all time. One of the things that I particularly love about the way that you create your comics visually are your page layouts. I think they're so incredibly unique, and I think it's something that not a lot of comic book fans talk about. And I was actually this morning rechecking out your work on Wonder Woman, and I've been reading Green Lantern concurrently, and just the way you're able to use some of the props from your background to break up the page.
Right.
Or in Green Lantern specifically, you start to do these really cool kind of geometric shapes to line it up, and it gives that sci-fi feel. So I guess furthermore, my question leading into this long ramble is, where do you think does your visual influences come into play with your page layouts like that?
Well, I think particularly on the Green Lantern, it's we've tried to get a different flavour of every issue, and that's changing a little bit towards the end now because it's becoming more about the story. But there was specific kind of things we were going for. So on the Vampire Planet one, I wanted it to have a very 70s Warren Comics type feel, and if you look at that, a lot of those Spanish artists used to do these very organic sort of flowing shapes, and so I really wanted to capture kind of a Vampirella type 70s vibe for that, and that went straight into the issue on Ran, and that was a very ordered Atom Age. So I was looking then at early Carmine Infantino stuff with Adam Strange, going for very traditional, clean, crisp layouts for that one. At the moment, the kind of jagged, angular stuff was suggested by when the Aquaman turns up for the first time, and he's in this sort of cocoon of angular shapes. And I just thought that would be a really nice thing to carry through as a theme for the end of the story, And it's just been really fun running with that way of doing it. It's actually, I feel like I've stumbled on something a little bit with that. There's a lot of space you can get into the pages when you start playing with the angles. Some of it, of course, the Green Arrow, Green Lantern one, that one was totally inspired by Neil Adams. So I was looking at his layouts and the way he shoots the angles, those extreme angles from below and above, and the foreshortening and everything. Very hard to do Neil Adams. He's such a genius, but I gave it my best shot.
Well, I mean, you certainly accomplish a lot, and I think for one, in the Green Lantern alone, the amount of versatility that you show between the different issues and the different covers stylistically. I mean, normally I think you're pretty well known for how detailed you get with the line art, but then you go to, I think it was it issue 10 with that cover. It's so softly shaded. And then there was, I can't remember what cover it was exactly. That one, yes.
9, I think.
Yes, 9. Yeah, it's so
one.
it's so soft and very painterly.
Right.
So for you, when you decide to make that shift back and forth from like heavy detailed lines to the more painterly soft style, is it a tonal difference you're trying to pull over?
Well, that one was done because all the covers we tried to get a pulp feel, so they've got the tagline. They're really a reference to sort of 1940s pulp magazines. So Grant has actually done like thumbnail layouts for all of those covers. The painterly one I did specifically to feel like one of those fantasy covers from the sort of 70s and 80s. So it's referencing a couple of guys that I used to really love when I was a kid. I mean, of course, you can never avoid Frazetta, but that one's more specifically Richard Corbin and Boris Vallejo type feel for it. So I was shooting for that kind of very fantasy. They used to do album covers like that as well. So that was the feel I was going for that one.
I mean, it's pretty incredible, just seeing the array of work and the way you're able to evoke so many different feelings and tones by simple changes in the art like that. Or maybe not simple. I don't know. I'm not the visual artist, but on the topic of panel layouts and the more technical stuff, just the way you decide to do that along with your camera angles, I think just added a whole new level of like dynamicism. That on top of, you can do such amazing mythical kind of character designs between, Wonder Woman and then the Brave and the Bold, and then even in your Green Lantern, I felt is kind of Green Lantern meets Star Wars Space Society. It's so incredible. What would you say are your influences, just visually, whether it be, cinema, comics, and I don't know if this might be a far stretch, but I see a lot of classical influence in your work as well.
Well, thank you for a start. A space opera, really. So I'm pure Star Wars generation. I was 8 when Star Wars came out, and I absolutely loved it. But I used to read the British reprints of Star Wars. It came out in a magazine format, and it had backup stories. So they had Adam Warlock was running in the back. Tons of this amazing John Byrne, Chris Claremont Star-Lord story that he did in the 70s, and it's just it was a big influence. And actually, it turned out that Grant and I both loved that stuff. So we were referencing Adam Warlock and Byrne, Claremont Star-Lord. Jim Starlin's Warlock stuff was just amazing. But I mean, in terms of the artwork, I think I'm definitely reaching into the past, for my influences. There's the Rand cover is very much an homage to Al Williamson, The people that I always looked to are people like Buscema and Al Williamson and Frazetta, and
Definitely see a little bit of Neil Adams in there too.
Right, and Barry Windsor Smith too, for the kind of detail and all of the, especially in Wonder Woman trees. I enjoy drawing trees far too much.
Yeah.
Trees and rocks, who knew?
They're the best looking trees in comics, so it's paying off. Yeah, I mean, so, you've gotten this opportunity now you've now written 2 of the most iconic characters in all of fiction. You've drawn quite a few of them between that, and then obviously you had that Justice League one-shot as well. So for you, now just kind of being a little bit more acquainted with the big 2, namely DC, what were your experiences working with all of these different writers and then getting to pen your own written work as well?
Well, it's funny because although I'm sort of getting rediscovered right now, I have been knocking around for a long time. I'm 33 years into the business. So I started in 2000 AD. I had a kind of early success at Marvel back on the Hulk and Spider-Man and Venom and things like that, and I did some Spawn Dark Ages with McFarlane at Image, but then it did go quiet for me for a while. I was still doing so I did Gears of War for DC, and that was Wildstorm, and that was actually in 2008 that was the biggest selling comic of the year, but nobody knows because it's a game related thing. It's funny. It's 400,000, crazy.
Nobody thinks about that.
Nobody thinks about the Gears of War book at all. But it was a huge seller, and I'm still actually really proud of that book, because for that was where I felt like I really sort of found my feet stylistically, and the detail style and the vibe of what I'm doing now is pretty much off the back of that. So a lot of the people within the industry I've sort of known for a long time. I've known Grant because we were both in 2000 AD back in the 80s, you know.
That seems to be like a big stepping stone for a lot of folk, you know, from the UK.
Yeah. Well, we all kind of cut our teeth there.
Yeah.
I know 2000 AD, the magazine itself is unfortunate for them because I know they would rather we didn't keep disappearing to the big two. But, you know, we all have such hugely fond memories of working for that magazine and learned so much doing it. How many great people came out of there, you know, Brian Bolland, Dave Gibbons, Jock, Chris Weston, I mean, it's on and on and on, Simon Bisley, Glenn Fabry, all of us. We all, I guess, we're pretty tight and know each other. You know? And then Marvel UK was the next place. That kind of blew up in the early 90s. So people like Alan Davis, who I just had a bit of lunch with, was nice to see him. So I've known these people for ages, but it's nice to be working with them. Finally. And Grant is just a joy to work with. He just winds me up and lets me go, you know? Sends me on my way.
Grant just has such a head on his shoulders, and he's so versatile, and he's afraid to kind of tackle both subject matter and general storytelling in such a way that, you know, I mean, that's how he became the name that he is.
Right.
So I think that, you know, Green Lantern kind of being one of the few characters he had never tackled in a singular book is so kind of up his alley, you know, with the amount of opportunity having a book in space, playing with the different organisms. One of the things that really caught me in particular was how, especially like issue 1, you start introducing some of the species and some of their biological traits. And like, for example, you know, there was a Green Lantern that was essentially like a virus. And it is an alive organism, so who's to say that creatures like that couldn't get the ring? You know, what type of collaboration does that imply between you and Grant, coming up with all of these different species and creatures to don rings and whatnot?
I mean, Grant has no problem just coming up with things. He's like, I think it's one of the pleasures for him. He loves making that kind of thing up, you know. But we talked a lot at the beginning about what the kind of story might be like, and what would a cop in space have to deal with? And we were saying, well, what if there was like sentient gas clouds that took a century to have a thought, and what if one of them's murdered the other one? How would he deal with that? So we had quite a few sort of large abstract conversations about possibilities, you know. But I think it's funny because he was never going to do another mainstream book, and we'd been talking about doing something create our own together at some point, and Dan Didio asked Grant to do Green Lantern, and Grant was like, no, I'm never doing another mainstream book, but if you're going to do Green Lantern, this is what you should do. And then he basically pitched the whole thing and talked himself into it, you know. So, you know, I'm glad he did.
Yeah, no, I'm sure the fans are too. You know, we've gotten a fantastic Green Lantern book so far. I think it's, for as much as everybody, and myself included, love like the Jeff Johns and the Rob Venditti run, this is so distinctly its own. But also, the powerful thing about comics are, it's not so far off that you wouldn't believe that this is the same Hal Jordan that's in every single one of those books. And so my next question, I guess, is a lot of people discuss how the writing plays into the themes of the book and really what this means for the characters and the worlds that you're building. So how do you interpret the scripts and add in, you know, those visual cues that kind of help to play off the writing and give it that emotional depth and understanding?
The thing I try to do, because Grant's scripts are very detailed. I keep giving this as an example, but page 2 of issue 1 had a single panel description that was 4 pages long. So everything was there. The trick is, for me, to put everything in that he asks for, and to do it as clearly as I can, because he's got so many moving parts in this story that I knew early on, if I didn't tell it as clearly as I could and make the worlds as clear and distinct as I possibly could, it was going to be hard for people to keep up with the story.
So moving forward, we've talked about a little bit of your more recent work. Do you have any any projects on the back burner that might be coming to fruition, or any characters or other creators you'd like to kind of collaborate with and partner up for a book?
There's definitely stuff on the back burner, but I'm not allowed to talk about it yet.
Fair enough.
I also don't want to jinx it. Well, it's looking like, fingers crossed, all being well, I'll be not only drawing some stuff, but writing for other artists as well. I think because of The Brave and the Bold was really well received. There's hopefully going to be a follow-up to that, which that one I will do.
Yeah.
I will draw. But there's another series with another big character that is hopefully I'm just going to get to write. And it's good as well because I know the artist for that. I wish I could talk about it, but he's a great artist and a mate, and very excited about that one. So that'll be next year. So, I mean, I've always written. It's a big deal for me to be given the opportunity to write for other people. I mean, that's going to be really fun. I haven't done much of that. I've done a little bit. I did for Madefire. I wrote stories for other people. Madefire was a digital storytelling company that I co-founded. Great app you can download, and there's a story that me and my wife did together called Captain Stone is Missing. We co-wrote it and I drew it. It's something I'm very proud of. So, and hopefully doing these bigger books will shine some light on the more independent stuff that I've done previously. So yeah, there's a lot going on. I've got a lot in the pipe works.
That's exciting, for the fans to hear. For myself personally, just as a fan, having an understanding that you're going to be coming out with some more great stuff, and we have a lot to look forward to. You're consistently knocking out fantastic after fantastic project. It's such a good time to be a comic book fan and seemingly, a Liam Sharp fan. Looking at all of the iconic characters out there, you've gotten a touch on Diana and Green Lantern in their own solo books. Are there any other characters that you really, really connect with and you feel like either visually or via the text and the script that you have a connection with, that you would like to personally work on yourself one day?
It's a really interesting one because I know I've been really lucky. I've drawn all the books I ever wanted to. I've drawn the X-Men, I've drawn the Hulk. I even did a Superman graphic novel back in the day with J.M. DeMatteis. It was a lot of fun. So I've drawn the Trinity. I think the truth is, though, you fall in love with the book you're working on. And it becomes... You become kind of obsessed with them, When I was drawing Wonder Woman, I just totally fell in love with Diana. She's just such a... Especially the way Greg writes it too, That was interesting when it came towards when Greg could no longer do it because of his workload. I wasn't ready to stop, It's like... Yeah. And I loved his version, so I didn't want to really... I knew that another writer would want to make that character theirs, and it would be a different Diana. I mean, because it always is. Everyone has their own voice, and everyone has their own way of, their own way of seeing these characters and their own sort of view of how they should be portrayed. And I think, Greg was always like, yeah, we're not going to do her scowling, and she's not going to carry the sword around. Why does she need a sword? He was like, why does she need a sword? Yeah, she's bulletproof. And she's as strong as Superman, but she doesn't need that. So he was always like, yeah, we don't want to put her in the cape. That's a ceremonial thing. That's the only time she's going to wear the cape. Yeah. I actually like the cape. But I liked that thought process and applying those sort of rules to her. And I also thought, well, maybe if I can pitch something that I can write, I can keep as near as Dammit without actually being Greg. I can keep that character, the one that I've grown to love, and I can sort of... I'll do my best to honour Greg's voice. I felt like I knew how she sounded and the way she spoke and how she would behave and interact with people. So, bearing that in mind when I did The Brave and the Bold, it was nice to still be with her, and feel like it was a continuation. For me, that series just came straight out of my run, my Wonder Woman run. It was just a continuation of the same story. Yeah. Well, it's so much fun,
Yeah, I can imagine bringing back something like The Brave and the Bold and getting to the two together, and the context is so fresh and original. We see a lot with like Greek mythology and so on and so forth, but very little, I think, do the general American public really understand Irish mythology, right? I mean, it's so special and different, and I think for the massive population of Irish Americans out there, it's kind of astounding, myself included. I do have some Irish blood. I have very little to no understanding or background knowledge behind that mythology, so I'm wondering what kind of made you feel like you could take that part of the world's pantheon of mythology and mix that with Wonder Woman, and then on top of that throw in somebody like Batman, because he kind of seems like the fish out of the water, and then kind of blend that all together.
Batman was definitely the fish out of water in that story, and that was intentional too. I like the idea that he was being literally a detective. He couldn't fight those guys. You know, he wasn't. He's like a hobbit, you know, in that world, you know. So he had to rely on his brain and his intellect and his intelligence, and that was fun, just making him a detective first and foremost. And he had to be there because Diana could not have solved what he solved.
Right.
She wouldn't have figured it out.
Right.
She's brilliant, and she's like can keep people calm and pull people together and is being a sort of advocate of peace and these kinds of things. But she's not a detective. Her brain doesn't work like that. So she needed his help. In terms of the Irish mythology side of things, funny you were saying about how Americans don't know about Irish mythologies. I think a lot of Brits, when I was younger, and it's still the case, they don't know about Celtic mythology. So we all know about Greek mythology, and we all know about Roman mythology and that pantheon of gods. And to some extent, I think the Viking pantheon has become more of a current thing. You know, people are interested in it, whether it's because of the Avengers or Thor or whatever. But people are, you know, in the TV shows like the Vikings.
You have like Neil Gaiman's American Gods.
Right. You know, people have a general interest in the Vikings, but they don't. Again, you know, not many people have touched on the Celtic gods or the Irish gods. And when I was a kid, when I was a kid, at school was doing all about Greek and Roman mythology, and I thought, I don't know anything about my mythology. That sort of led me down this rabbit hole about Celtic myths, and that led to Welsh myths, and then eventually Irish myths. And my wife's father is Irish, so we would just talk about the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomors and you know, all of these legends from the Silver Arm. And I discovered this book by Jim Fitzpatrick. He actually wrote the introduction to the collected edition. He did some illustrated books of Irish legends called the Silver Arm, actually, and that's where I got most of my reference for this series. Some of it from other books as well. There's Lady Gregory did a series of books where she took the oral histories of Irish mythology and she wrote them down. So there's once you start looking for it, there's quite a lot of information, you know. And then even W.B. Yeats roaming as Wazin and all of that stuff. So I just kind of I fell in love with those myths. Cernunnos is not an Irish god at all, you know. He's a Celtic god. But I had always wanted to do a story with Cernunnos because he's one of those characters that exists in imagery and we've got his name, but there's no stories left about him. Nobody knows anything about him. So he's this like kind of blank slate, but I've always been drawn to him. He's kind of like a Pan-type nature god, you know, a god of cycles and life and death and the underworld. And so he was a really sort of fascinating character tie into it.
I think there's something very interesting in the fact that you were talking about how there's very little left in terms of textual stories. It's so fitting that an artist to take a myth, a character out there that doesn't have a lot of text left and be the one to interpret the visuals and put that to text itself. You know, mixing that on top of Wonder Woman's background in mythology and blending it together with Batman, I think is just such an interesting concept. So it's so original, and I think originality, especially in the big two nowadays, can be really hard to come by. So kudos for doing that.
I was amazed that they went for it, but I was really pleased as well. You know, they said, well, pitch something, you know.
Yeah.
I said, well, I got this one idea. It's a bit left field. Hear me out, you know. Imagine the fairy realm and there's been a murder of a god and Batman needs to be brought in, and then of course Dan Didio was just like, well, it's just great, we haven't done a Brave and Bold for ages, this is a perfect Brave and Bold story, you know. It's just great that they went for it, and to get to design this pantheon, and there's fun stuff too, like the idea that fairies are really small and that it was because they were meant to be giants, these people, and it's only as they became diminished over time, as they were forgotten, that they went underground, and the idea that actually the reports about their stature were a little bit exaggerated by a later faith, you know, that came along and basically belittled them so that it could aggrandize itself, you know. So all of those things are quite fun, and for to get into the fairy realm and discover they're still giants, you know, they're not little at all.
Yeah.
And the Tuatha De Danann were very much the sort of template for Tolkien's elves.
Yes, yeah.
Which is, so it's cool.
That's spectacular. I guess moving forward, we talk a lot about the technical aspect of being the artist, and I think one of the things that I find most consistent with the best artists, both visually and scripturally through the text, is they in some way pour themselves into their work. and they make themselves a little bit vulnerable. I'm wondering for you, especially being the combination of both writer and artist, in those individual kind of settings, how do you yourself feel like you pour yourself into your work?
I think it's always important to some extent, to write about things that you have a passion about and care about and is close to you. I mean, in terms of the Irish mythology in The Brave and the Bold, it's because it was so personal to me. It's because my father-in-law was so passionate about those stories, and he was always saying, "Oh, you've got to do, a Canuna story or a Danann story," or he would always be pushing me just, to do a story of these gods or an adaptation in comic form. And there's quite a lot of adaptations of Cuchulainn and The Dawn and these sort of stories, but I've not seen anything mainstream like this where the world was really introduced into one of the major companies in a big way.
So real quick, we had to stop a couple times throughout the interview because obviously Liam's a popular guy and we were sitting at his booth. So he had to interact with some of his fans and he had commissions and stuff to do. So right here, this transition was a little bit jarring where I had stopped recording, but I wanted to let you know that we do start to move into kind of the aspect of being a creator and how well your art is received.
On that, I feel like just interrupting that little segment, that must be something so special to be a creative and have somebody love your work and just admire that part of you. I feel like, I don't know, just looking at it from the outside, that seems like the thing that kind of makes it all worth it.
I'm on cloud 9 at the moment. I felt like I was in the wilderness for 20 years, really. I know I was doing stuff, we were talking about it earlier on, and I never really went away. But there's no substitute for feeling that you are actually connecting with an audience. And I didn't feel that for a long time. And I'm definitely feeling it now. And it's been just insanely humbling to be at this show. And any of the shows that I've done recently since Wonder Woman, really. And increasingly, I think even more so with the Green Lantern, it seems to have reached even more people. And I don't know, I feel like I feel a connection with the readers. It's great. The interactions that I'm blessed to have really online on Twitter, it's so overwhelmingly positive. And I do my best to be as open as I can with the fan base and as honest as I can and speak from the heart and speak about what it's really like to be in the industry and not try to put any glossy spins on it, but be honest and be as helpful as I can. But there's also another side to it too. I think, I just turned 50, I'm 51 now. When you've had early success, which I had, and then you fall off the radar for a long amount of time, you realise that the next time that door opens and you get the opportunities again, you realise how lucky you are, how rare that opportunity is, and you take it. I never took it completely for granted, but I don't even take it even slightly for granted now. So every day I get up and I get to sit at my drawing board and if I'm struggling a bit, I just remind myself of that, and it's like you just better be grateful, and appreciate the fans and appreciate the people that are buying and supporting the work, and appreciate the people who've given you the work as well, without getting too soppy about it. It's real. It's a real thing. You take it very seriously. So I'm just sort of grabbing the bull by the horns and staying on this crazy ride as long as I can,
That's the way to do it. And I've had such the fortune to sit down with so many talented people like yourself and really just get to see the person behind the art and understand that, they value the fans as much as we value your work. And it's always great to have somebody who does well on the page, right? You either a spectacular artist or a spectacular writer. But when you learn that there's a genuinely great person behind their art, it is so much more redeeming to be supportive and put your work out there and contribute in any way that we can. So just as a fan, I want to thank you for that, truly, because it's so easy to meet talented people and they let it go to their head and they're just not genuinely great people. And there are a couple of guys that I've met even at this convention in the past, obviously not going to name names, but it's so much more powerful when you have somebody who you can connect to on a personal level through the interaction, but also in their art. And I know before we were talking a little bit about how, you infuse your personality and your own emotions and thoughts and desires in your work. How does that shift when you go from writing a book to drawing a book and kind of interpreting someone else's script, is there some sort of connection that you try to make with what the writer is handing you? Or do you sometimes just feel, this is how I think that this character would react, and I'm going to be the actor-director here and just kind of make that decision?
Increasingly what happens is that the writers and artists talk. So definitely with Greg, it was a collaboration, and I had freedom to throw ideas into the mix. That was such an amazing thing to be able to collaborate with Greg like that. In terms of working with Grant is also an artist. He could have easily been a really good comic strip artist if he chose to go down that path. But his head is exploding with so many ideas. He chose to write, which was the right decision. But because he thinks visually, and because he has a very good eye, and because he now knows me really well, he writes specifically with my art in mind. Mm-hmm. So he knows what I can do, and I guess as a result, I'm just having the best time. It's just like he just trusts me completely, and I never get any notes from him, and it's in so many ways it's the easiest and most fun book I've ever done, because I get the script, I draw it goes off, and that's that. It's an unbelievable pleasure. In terms of how much of me is in there, I guess there is more than I probably realise, because, and again, that's part of the fun of it. I'm putting so many of the things that I loved as a reader, as a fan, as a kid myself,
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm revisiting my own childhood a lot of the time, doing this book. I've stopped trying to be trendy or current in my style. I used to do that too much in the past and try to adapt to whatever was the coolest style of the times. Back when I did Death's Head, I definitely was doing that was the Marvel House style. It became the Image House style, but it kind of started by Jim Lee and Liefeld and Mark Silvestri, and I loved what those guys did. And they were all inspired by Barry Smith, so it had this kind of very ornate feel to it. And Art Adams also is a good friend of mine now, his neighbour. Our daughter dog sits for them when they go to conventions, so he's an amazing artist. But all of those guys were inspired by art, a lot of it, Art Adams's work. But it became a style that a lot of us adopted at the time and slightly adapted to our own style. In what I'm doing now, though, and I guess it's because enough time has passed that what I'm doing looks new, but is actually just completely rooted in an old-fashioned approach to doing things. It's very textured, and it's brush line work for the most part. I put the shadows in and put a lot of cross-hatching and rendering, and it's very old school, really.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me for so long. I could sit and chat with you forever, Liam. This has been such a surreal experience. Thank you, obviously, to your lovely wife for being so gracious. So, just in closing, is there anything that you kind of want to let your fans know, the people that appreciate your art, or maybe somebody who's listening to this and hasn't gotten the pleasure of checking out your work? Is there anything you'd like them to know?
Oh, that's a broad question, that one. One thing I'm terrible at is selling myself. I say one thing, there's actually many things I'm terrible at, but that is one of the things that I'm terrible at. What would I say to somebody who's not come across my work? I think that if you like well-realized world building, then you might like it, because one of the things that I really get a kick out of is the world building side of it. Because that's the magical thing. To me, the environment is one of the characters, and we are. You mentioned earlier, do we feel like the director and the cinematographer? The artist is all of those things. Of course we are, because a comic script is almost exactly like a movie script, and we work from it in the same way that a director would work from a movie script. But we're also all the actors, because we have to put ourselves in that role, and in that position. So in that sense, we're not unlike animators who are also actors, but they're behind the scenes. They're the people who make films like, at Pixar, and got the voice actors, but the people who are actually animating those characters and creating all the gestures and setting up the shots and everything, they're as much actors as the voice actors. So you have to be all the characters. You have to be committed to the worlds that you're building. I don't want them to feel like plastic sets. Sometimes you might go to a convention and you'll see like a really cool stand, and it's all been cast out, plastic and different kind of resins or whatever, but they've done it and it looks cool, but it looks like a set still. It looks like it's been thrown up, over a couple of days. I want the worlds that I create to feel lived in and real and crumbling at the edges,
Organic,
and organic. And when I drew the big shot of Oa, I wanted it to look like there was precincts and look like there's a little park area there, and this might be the residential area, and that huge big crumbling building in the background might be where they do all the processing, and here might be a library, and here's where they'll gather for big ceremonies or whatever. But I also wanted it to feel new and old and magical and industrial, but also beautiful. So you try and involve all those things. I often say to artists, if you're thinking about, if you're going to draw rocks, for instance, rock isn't made of one kind of substrate, it's a whole bunch of different rocks, different types of rock. So is it a porous rock? Is it a rock that's got a more crystalline structure? All of those things will inform a landscape. And it's the same about if you're going to if you're going to start putting plants into the scene, don't just draw the leaves all the same shape, because there are many different kinds of plants in any single field. If you're going to cover a rock in vines, there's fun things too, like in issue, which one would it be, 4, where we're on Ran for the first time. And we don't know the four-armed cowboy is how. There's stuff in that scene, like in the foreground. There's plants that look like the buildings in the background. And the fun, I did that, and I said, so this is how they came up with the idea of those crazy, like flute-like buildings, which have been in the stories since, the 50s. So that Atom Age look, the idea that we finally get to say, yeah, they were inspired by the fauna, the plants, the flora, of the planet.
Yep.
It's the kind of plantation that inspired the buildings. So those kinds of things are fun, They're just like, they add a little extra level of detail. It doesn't matter if you don't pick it up straight away, but it's there if you look for it, and I think on a subconscious level, sometimes things like that register in a way that signals reality more than not, more than you might consciously recognize. That's just a hunch.
Going along what you were saying is, and I think that's partly how at least you built your more recent fan base, is your attention to detail. And it can be something as simple as physical details in the structures and the backgrounds and the environments, but also the way that you as the actor, director, cinematographer make these characters move and interact and how they express themselves. I think one of the strengths, especially in a Green Lantern book that is entirely powered by emotion, right, is looking at the gestures and the facial expressions of these characters. You watch Hal go through his trials on the planet, to earn all of the Black Star gear, and you can see how he's feeling every step of the way. And there's something so special about what you're doing there and how it is so inherently comic book in the way that Grant writes something and then you can interpret it and translate it, but also add yourself to it, and to make two-dimensional static pictures into a movie with a fraction of the budget. So it's so spectacular. And at the end of the day, I want you to definitely know that as a consumer, as a fan of your art, and as a fan of art in general, you're accomplishing all those things. We see all of the subtle detail and the attention that you pay to the characters and the world and what you're doing. And that's why we can relate to your work and to your characters. And I think there's something so much stronger in that than just strictly falling in love with the visuals, as beautiful as they are. So all of that depth and layering is there, and we appreciate it.
Well, that means a ton. Thank you. You just made my day. But I'm really grateful to hear that. It means a lot, and it's interesting because the acting is important. I think, in the past, when I look at my old work, I would be so worried about the quality of the drawing that sometimes the storytelling would suffer. And I think increasingly as I've got older, what's most important is how you tell a story, and everything is in service to the story.
Agreed.
So I try and, like I said earlier on, I don't want to grandstand. I don't try to make every page a pin-up. And I don't want the reader to feel like when they're reading the book they are stopped by the art. I love that people are saying, I read the whole issue, then I go back and then I look at the art, which is what I want. I don't want them to be stopping all the way through. I want it to pull them through first, and then if you go back, then you can study the details. But if you keep stopping, then I'm failing.
Yeah. There you have it, a master at his craft explaining it. And thank you. Seriously, this has been such a tremendous experience, just sitting down and talking to you, and having the opportunity to pick your brain and really just get to learn a little bit about the guy that's behind the pencils. So thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you very much for talking to me.
You guys heard it here, man. Liam Sharp, a master of craft, and been such a tremendous experience here at Terrificon. Again, thank you so much.